really appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit about the money system again. I have a question for you. If you could create money by adding a number to your checking account and then you could go out and spend it, what number would you add to your checking account? Would you add enough money to get yourself out of debt? Would you add enough money to buy a new car or a new house? Would you potentially add enough money to pay off the national debt? Would you potentially add that figure in your checking account to potentially end poverty? You see, the U.S. government has the ability to do that, but they choose not to. They choose to engage a system that creates debt-based money. But we have a history, a good example that sets a precedent in our country for creating debt-free money with President Lincoln back during the Civil War. But let's take a look at the handout. Here we have debt-based money, and this is a very simplified overview. But the way that money gets created, Congress sets the budget. The Treasury Department prints and sells bonds to banks, the big banks, including the Federal Reserve. This adds to the national debt. They charge us interest on the money that we borrow into existence. Basically, they charge us interest for creating and using our own money. And eventually that money gets simply added to the checking account for the United States. They don't even have to print the money anymore. All they have to do is to write in that number in the account and spend it. Wow. On the other hand, if we re-engaged the option to create debt-free money, well, column 2, and again this is my preference, again Congress sets the budget. It simply advises the Treasury at some point how much money to write into that checking account. There's no additional debt. There's no interest charge. Again, the money eventually just gets written into the checking account and they spend it. Eventually, if we initiated that type of system today, the interest that we would eventually pay is zero. Eventually we would pay off the debt that we have today with debt-free money, and that would free up billions of dollars to help us. Again, if you look at the 2017 fiscal year, which just ended, if you look at the interest that was paid on the national debt, it almost hurts to have to say this. It was $458,542,287,311.80. Again, that's available on the U.S. government website. And that's money that we are not able to use to help with education, to help with health care, to help with immigration issues, to help with veterans issues. We do have a list where $458 billion would come in handy. Would you agree with me on that? Yeah. And the part that's very interesting is that we've had a debt-free money system before. President Lincoln needed to borrow money to win the Civil War. And so he went to the bankers and said, I need to borrow money to supply the troops to win the Civil War. And their response was, well, okay, we'll lend you as much money as you need starting at 24% interest. And wisely, President Lincoln said, I don't think so. So he went back to his advisors, and one of those advisors was a military colonel named Edmund Taylor. And Taylor said, well, why don't we create that money free of charge in the Treasury? And I have a quote for you. Taylor said, just get Congress to pass a bill authorizing the printing of full legal tender Treasury notes and pay your soldiers with them and go ahead and win your war with them. Also, if you make them full legal tender, they will have the full sanction of the government and be just as good as any money as Congress is given the express right by the Constitution. From 1862, when we had the Legal Tender Act of 1862, up until the mid-1990s, we had debt-free United States notes in circulation. They were also called greenbacks, if you've heard of greenback dollars. The debt-free money were greenback dollars. That means that we had a debt-free money system in operation for over 130 years. And when you consider that the Federal Reserve Act created the Federal Reserve banking system in 1913, and the United States notes were in circulation from 1913 to the mid-1990s, that means that for over 80 years, we had a dual money system in the United States. You had the debt-based Federal Reserve notes, and you had the debt-free United States notes. Now, when you look at the history of that, and you have to choose between debt-free money with 0% interest versus years and years of paying millions and billions of dollars in interest that we can't use for anything else. Don't you think it's time to look back at history and figure out how to recreate a debt-free money system like honest Abraham Lincoln had the good sense to do in 1862? The question came up, why were the debt-free United States notes discontinued? A web search for legal tender status found this statement at the US Treasury website: United States notes serve no function that is not already adequately served by Federal Reserve notes. But Federal Reserve notes cannot fulfill the purpose of keeping us out of debt slavery to the bankers, can they? Interest paid on the national debt from 2008 through 2017, a 10-year stretch, was $4,202,497,424,373.60. I'd say this is at least 4.2 trillion reasons to have a debt-free money system.